Okay, we'll call our meeting to order. Let the minutes reflect all members are present, and we'll start with setting the agenda. Any changes, additions to this agenda today?
President Preiner, staff would just note that the referenced permit, the correct number is 19-091, not 81, but 91.
Could you repeat that, Nick?
Sure, 19-091.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else?
That's all.
I'd like to make,
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda
With correction?
with the one little correction.
Yeah.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, approval of the minutes.
Madam President, I move to approve the October 3rd, 2019 special meeting minutes.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye. And I suppose I should do these all separate in case somebody.
In case anybody wants to bring it up.
Madam President, I move to approve the October 7th, 2019 workshop minutes.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Madam Chair, move to approve the, where am I?
October 9th.
October 9th, 2019 regular meeting minutes.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
And Madam Chair, move to approve the October 14th, 2019 special meeting minutes.
Aye.
Motion made and seconded. I assume, John, you're
Yes,
second?
second, yeah.
All in favor?
Sorry.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we're on to the consent agenda.
Boy, did we meet a lot.
President
I was
Preiner,
thinking the same thing.
President Preiner, Board of Managers, we do have one permit ready for your consideration with Caprock items. Staff
And,
is
of course-
happy for any questions.
Of course, here I am about the questions. The only reason why I say it is because of the big, huge developments done on the acreage and how many acres are going to be disturbed, et cetera. I just sort of a clarification. When you calculate all of this, all of the runoff that's going to happen from the building, because we're going to have so much impervious surface, did you, through these underground chambers that you've got here, it's all going to really take care of every bit of all those impervious surface and going into those chambers, and then the agreement that you have on those chambers to make sure they're going to be cleaned before it's released into the watershed, into the various storm sewer pipes. Okay?
President Preiner, Manager Hockey, that's generally correct. Yes, the rules require 1.1 inches over the new impervious area and reconstructed. That is a volume of water that must be treated and addressed on site. They are not underground chambers. They are actually infiltration basins, which is, beyond your question, notable because this volume of water, which is roughly, what is that, about 22,000 cubic feet, is then infiltrated into the ground and doesn't end up going downstream, which is one of the major key components of your regulation.
Okay, and so it's all, and it's been calculated perfectly and everything, and all the waters, nothing left, nothing extra is going to go downstream than what already is done, because it's going to be held in these particular basins, and then the basins would have to be cleaned out, wouldn't they? And that's all, is this all one ownership, or how does that happen? To be able to make
Yes.
sure the basins maintain their ability to infiltrate the
Yep.
water?
President Preiner, Manager Hockey, you're correct. I'll just clarify in regards to the waters that do head downstream. On page 25 of your packet, you'll see a table at the top of the page
Yeah.
that indicates the cubic feet per second that runs off the site, and it is held 80%, or excuse me, 20% below the existing condition, and that's another key component in your rule to help alleviate flooding down at Long Lake. And the BMPs, the infiltration basins, are subject to a recorded declaration of maintenance and their continued function through time. Yep.
And the listing of people that are going to be involved with all this, who's the one that's going to make sure, how is it put in to maintain it? What, is there an overall construction or company that owns this whole property to make sure that these do get taken care of in the future.
Right, that, Manager Hockey, President Priner.
Don't get so formal, just say Barb, okay.
Hey Barb, the way they
Yeah,
do it
there you
is
go.
it's whoever the landowner is, it's recorded on the property. So
Yeah.
at this time, if all these people have an interest in the property, their names will be on the document that's recorded. Any subsequent owner, any unification of ownership under an LLC, et cetera, would be subject to that recorded document. At the time it's done, we just make sure we have the proper owners involved.
Okay. Well,
That's where your
I just-
attorneys come in to assist us.
Attorneys, yeah, they always, can you be useful, can't they?
Indeed.
Sometimes. All right. I'll make a motion that we, Caprock, item 19-091, and that's the Norhart Hasten NW Land LLC, Scott's, whatever, City of Lexington.
Okay,
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The next thing is open mic. Is there anybody in the audience that doesn't have a already listed agenda item that would like to speak? Anybody? Okay, so if somebody comes in later, we'll address that then. Let's go to items requiring board action. Moral petition, Nick? Page
Yes.
28.
President Priner, Board of Managers, this morning we have before you the Morel petition for repair of Anoka County Ditch 102232 Branch 1. This does have a fair amount of history that's laid out in the staff memo. Notably, on November 1st, 2016, some time ago, you did receive a petition from Jeff Morel seeking for us to investigate the obstruction of the system and proceed accordingly on that petition. We did accept the petition, had our engineer assigned to it. Mr. Morel, during that time frame, did apply for a WACA, Wetland Conservation Act application, which was later withdrawn. And this has gone on for some time. We've had some communication with Mr. Morel's attorneys, and they have asked us to keep the matter in abeyance, although with the withdrawal of his past Wetland Conservation Act application and not seeing any item that ties the two together, that is consideration of the petition and the Wetland Conservation Act, we think it's reasonable for the board to proceed to be prompt in its response to such a petition. Again, 2016. I think Mr. Kolb is present. He could probably do a better job of explaining that distinction between the two. And then after that, I do note that Jeff Morel is present and can speak to the condition on his property and how he feels about all of this.
Madam President, members of the board, I think Nick gave a fair overview of what has transpired. This matter has been pending before you for almost 3 years now. We undertook, upon receipt of the petition, an engineering study to look at alternatives, to discover what was the issue, to look at what alternatives might be available to the board in terms of repair, and as an alternative to repair, the payment of damages. Upon the recommendation of the engineer related to damages, we invited discussions with Mr. Morel, his technical consultants and attorneys. We talked about alternative theories of damages. I think the engineer went back and took a second look based on information received from Mr. Morel's technical consultant, came back, I think, with just a minor adjustment in an idea of damages. And really the issue here is that the obstruction has done two things. One, it has elevated the 100-year flood elevation on Mr. Morel's property, which affects a small portion of Mr. Morel's property that wasn't affected prior to the obstruction being in the ditch. And the second question is whether or not it has caused wetland signatures on the property. That then prompted the Wetland Conservation Act application from Mr. Morel, which is subsequently withdrawn. From staff's perspective, there's been no new information related to the alternatives proposed by the engineer or the damage analysis prepared by the engineer. From staff's perspective, both the district, the drainage system, and Mr. Morel need some finality on this. And in our opinion, the request of Mr. Morel via his attorneys to delay pending a subsequent WACA application really doesn't go to the issue, which is, do you repair it or do you pay damages? And there's nothing about a decision under the drainage code with regard to a repair that would affect a concurrent or subsequent application under the Wetland Conservation Act. The facts that would be relevant to that are well established, they're historical facts, and I think in many ways a decision on the drainage system would confirm some of those facts. Mr. Morel has the option, obviously, to present additional information at the hearing with regard to the alternatives to repair or the payment of damages. And if, depending on what the board's decision is, if the board pursues the alternative to pay damages, he would clearly have appeal rights related to those damages if he chose to pursue them. So from staff's perspective, this is an issue of it's been sitting on the table for a long time, everyone deserves finality, and we've been presented no information that would lead us to conclude that there is due cause for further delay in the board's consideration of the petition.
Questions? Go ahead, Nick.
President Preiner, just to be clear, for the board, that we are looking just to set the public hearing,
Public hearing.
at which time there may be additional information, discussion, et cetera, for you to consider.
Thank you.
There is a notice requirement, and the timeline that's been set out, that's contained in the draft order for the hearing on page 30 of your packet. If the decision were made tonight to set, or today to set that date, would leave us plenty of time to assemble and to make the necessary notices, both under board policy and under the drainage code.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Cole? Any board questions?
Just because of the involvement, and so far, nothing from WACA, it's been withdrawn. At that hearing, will we have that information? That's what we're waiting to hear?
Again, the WACA determination, if you have no pending application under the
Okay, we
Wetland
don't have
Conservation
it.
Act,
Okay.
and they are really two separate issues.
All right, and
The
that's
Wetland
not-
Conservation Act application that we previously received was for really to consider the applicability of the Wetland Conservation Act
To that.
to wetlands that are currently delineated on Mr. Morel's property. Part of that was to discover whether or not the obstruction of the ditch was causing those wetlands to be in existence, and maybe by original construction of the ditch, they did not originally exist. That was what we were forced to consider. Those are all things that were initially considered by your engineer and are contained in your engineer's analysis and recommendation. There was nothing new in that application that changed or would have altered the opinion of your engineer, and subsequently that, or eventually that application was withdrawn. And again, if there's going to be a second application, we can only assume it would be along the same lines, but again, there's nothing about a decision under the drainage code that would prevent that or alter the outcome of your consideration of such an application. You would look at that on its own independent merits based on the facts and the evidence presented.
Any other questions? Mr. Morel, would you like to comment before, all we're gonna do today is set a hearing date. today.
Yes, I understand.
And no
I'll try to
objection.
keep it really short
Okay, that's no problem.
and not get upset. Yeah, this has been going on, we've been trying to resolve this. My land has changed from being able to have pheasants when I first bought the property in 1987 and baled hay, had baling equipment to bale hay. Now my truck, all-wheel drive truck, got stuck this morning. I took a picture this morning. It has now turned into a floodplain. It's a floodplain on a daily basis, where It's impossible to drive my international harvester out there with my brush hog. I have to wait until it all freezes to be able to cut down the grass. And it's because of the invert. And the invert has to be removed. I'm getting water from the 6th edition that was lower land that they built on. Now that water, the storm water from the streets and the land, is dumping into this ditch. And it is coming down from the north to the south. And I got water from the south from the invert that when they built Century Farms, they did not do it properly underneath the Williams pipeline like they should have, and that was allowed. And I never received any information. No one has. I just want the teepee, or the invert as it's called, removed. Then I don't seek any damages. I just want, if I had put an invert in a ditch and raised the water level 16 inches plus on my neighbors and caused their land to be flooded, I think you'd probably take action against me, which would be warranted, and I'd have to remove it and pay for it. Now, this was done to me, and I want it repaired properly. And then I don't want any money. Otherwise, my 10 acres is totally worthless. I'm worried that my water's gonna run into my house. If we ever did get the 100-year flood, water would run into my house. And it was never anywhere close to that in the 33 years I've lived there. So, let me see if I can show you just this one picture from this spring. Where do I put this? Huh?
See it right there.
See, you're good. Me, I'm just a man, what'd you expect? Okay, there we go. You see, this is the ditch. Let's see. Okay, you got it up here. Okay, this is the ditch here. Here's the 6th edition, and this is my land. This is my land.
You can point on your phone, too.
You can put your
Then-
finger on your phone.
Here, do it on the phone, and then
Oh,
we can
oh,
all see
okay.
it. That'd be super.
See,
The big,
more training.
there you go.
Nothing new. Okay, there's my land. Can you see that ditch?
Yeah, I see
That
water.
that ditch is flowing onto my land. And when I bought my tractor, my first brush hog, I used to go down this time of the year. I used to go down, drive into the ditch and cut the grass down, I figured the deer could sleep down there or whatever and, maybe get out. Who knows? But that's really where I'm at. So where we go from here, I appreciate your time. It was nice meeting y'all.
Madam President, can I ask one question?
Certainly.
When was the 6th edition added?
Was that not last year? 2017, 2018? 2018. Now, they've got a storage pond there that Century Farms, Gary Udy, they've got a pipe that flows into they've got a stormwater holding pond. Do I say that right?
Yes.
Okay, and then they put a pipe in, so all that extra water that goes into that storm holding pond goes into the ditch, and it fills the ditch. And so when we get rain, like yesterday or the day before, it floods my land on a continuous basis. Not once every 100 years, not every 30 years, but every month. So, okay, I'll try to be quiet and go away.
Well, thank you for your
Yep,
explanation.
and thank you very much for your time, and
We
thank you,
appreciate meeting you,
kind lady.
yeah.
Madam President, one more question,
Go ahead.
not to Mr. Morale, but to our engineer. I assume we did our analysis before that new addition was added. And so the
Century
question
Farm.
is, do we need to take another look at the impact on Mr. Morale's land post that addition being built? Something for you to think about.
Madam President, Manager Bradley, I'm not exactly sure when the permit and the construction went through with regard to when we completed our analysis. However, in terms of evaluating the potential options that we may have, I would say that the development going in, particularly since the development had to meet all the district rule requirements, is irrelevant to how we evaluate the different alternatives. And I guess the other thing I'll note is that, again, what we're looking at is comparing what options we might have, modifying the elevation in the ditch, or the teepee as it's known, versus a couple other alternatives for getting the water out of the ditch off the landscape, lowering those elevations, and then comparing that to potentially what the damages might be when comparing the ditch in its present condition versus the obstruction or blockage in the ditch not being there at all. And so how the permitting occurs was actually not considered at all within our memorandum, and nor did I feel like it was appropriate for it to be.
Let me push back a little bit, Madam President. I don't care that they met our permit. I mean, the issue is whether or not, regardless of our permit, there's more water coming off that ditch than when we looked at it and assessed it. That's the question.
Yeah, that was gonna be my same thing, is I don't think it matters whether it met our rules or not. We need to take a look at what's going on, find out if there was an issue before we did it, or something needs to be changed, or whatever, I don't know.
President.
Go ahead.
President Priner, Board of Managers, I think what the discussion is running into is the changing land use and the volumes. While the district controls rate at the site, the volume of water continues. Our district model has repeatedly shown to you that increased volumes cause us hotspots. Now that, in my mind, is certainly an issue the district deals with. However, the teepee is what the petition is about. Is there an obstruction in the ditch? What are the alternatives considered? Should it be removed or not? And if you can't, if you find that it ought not be, then we're looking at awarding damages. Beyond that,
My point is
there-
that damages might be different after that construction.
well, that's a good question for your attorney, because I think you'd run into much problem of awarding lots of damage for things that really aren't under your control. They're under the land use authority's control. And so that, in my mind, would be a petition to improve the system to allow the drainage off the sites quicker.
I don't want to enter into an argument with you at this point, but if the TP is causing a blockage, it becomes a weir, and then you add more water up north, whether it's our fault or not, it's still the TP that's causing the more water to pool there, and that would change the damages if we decide not to replace the TP.
Let's let Mr. Kolb address it, please. Mr. Burrell, thank you.
Madam President and Manager Bradley, I think you've articulated the very issue, which is the teepee causing a damage? And we have to be very careful to not mix, again, this adjacent land use and the idea of what might constitute a private conflict. If a neighbor's draining land onto you in an unreasonable way, the private landowner may have a cause for damages against the adjacent land use versus whether or not the teepee is causing that. The area of the photo is immediately adjacent to the ditch. That area prior to the teepee going in was always within the 100-year floodplain. It was already there. And again, I noted that the photo taken on May 9th, I'm not sure what year, but we also have to look at what are the antecedent conditions to that photo being taken, because if it was a storm that would have caused a 100-year flood elevation, the conditions that portrayed in the photo are exactly what we would have expected. So I think it's fair that the board look at issues of the development of the adjacent lands. I think that the engineer did that, maybe not to the same extent that some of the managers might want. That certainly can be performed. I think, I don't want to speak for the engineer, but if the board wants that additional information and thinks that it's valuable to their consideration, if you were to set a public hearing, you certainly should ask for that. And I think that your engineer could certainly provide that to you. But the caution that I'm going to give you both now and at the hearing, and of course, you have no decision right now. You could take the TP out, you could pump the water, you could do all of the things that are the alternatives that are in the engineer's report. But I'm going to caution you both now and at the hearing to focus on what are the effects of the TP and how do we address those effects. And if adjacent land use is built up around this property, regardless of whether the TP was there or not, we have to be cautious not to assume that that's all the cause of the TP. And that's really where your engineer is going to have to do some work to satisfy the managers that those issues have been looked at and can be explained or addressed satisfactorily so that you can get to a decision.
Then let me ask this to everybody. By December 11th, do we think we have enough information? Is there anything else that everybody would require, want? If we get to that hearing, we should have complete information. It's been long enough.
Absolutely.
You know, if anybody else has any.
We had, yes, we had assumed it was gonna be more efficient and more effective to address Mr. Morel's problems through damages than replace the TP. We are currently at loggers on doing that. So I also want the alternative of consequences or costs or whatever of removing the TP along with the issue of
At
the
the hearing.
damages.
Madam President, just for clarity here, Mr. Morel used the word invert, and we've been using the words TP, so that is the same thing we're talking about.
I
Mr. Cope.
believe Mr. Morel is talking about the TP, the obstruction, invert.
Okay.
I think we're all
I
referring to the same
just want
thing.
that clarity in here.
Good
Jeff, is
idea.
that?
The invert
Come on,
is
Jeff.
actually on
Mr.
the
Morel?
engineering.
Mr. Earl, I have to have you take the mic.
The invert term is actually on, I think Houston Engineering was involved in allowing this, that ditch to be altered underneath the pipeline, raised up, which raised up the water level over 16 inches on my land. And that was May of this year, and this is a photo from this morning at 7:54 a.m. Let's see. And then, so you got it? Okay, you see it there? The grass is tall, but that's the ditch. That's a ditch, and it's right up. I say no more.
It's out of its banks.
Pardon me?
Is it out of the banks of the ditch?
In one area it is, yeah. Coming back, just like that first photo I showed you. Yeah, like I said, this is not a 100-year. We didn't get a 100-year rainfall here in the last couple of days. It's just normalcy in Minnesota.
President Pronner, just for the record, the development and the TP occurred prior to Houston Engineering being your consulting engineer.
Prior to that?
Was it?
Prior.
There, Madam President, as I recollect, and I hope that the history is demonstrated, this has been a very long-term problem, and as Mr. Morel indicated, there's a sixth edition. Well, that means there was a first and a second and a third long before we were here. You and I are on the board. I don't know about manager hockey,
I know, I knew you were gonna do that.
but
Okay, well, what we need for sure then is all the information if we're gonna set our December 11th. Anybody? Yeah. We're ready to go on setting it.
President Pronner, thank you. Board of Managers, to be clear, was there additional information that you looked for your engineer to computate and have available for the hearing?
I would like to know whether the recent additions have changed our calculation of damages and how you determined that.
And I want to just make clear what I said before. I think we should always be looking at these when there's an issue, not necessarily for the upcoming petition, or the hearing, but we should always be looking at them to see if there's something that should be changed or done. So I'm not saying that necessarily that had to be done before the hearing or for the hearing. Just as a general rule, we should be doing that.
I further hope that when we do the hearing, we will also have available to us the option of removing the TP for consideration.
Right. Agreed.
I should have said when I was up here, if any of you want to come over and see my land, it's not much, it's 10 acres. I'd hope to develop it, you know. If you would like to come out, my phone number is 612-750.
Let's do this.
Yeah,
Let's
we-
not
well-
put that
Yeah,
on
yeah.
television.
Yeah, you might get a few calls. There you go. Good catch, John.
Okay, my number. But, yeah, come over, take a look, and see that this, if it was your land, if it was Nick's land, if it was Chris's land, and this happened to you, or John's land, and this happened to you. Yeah.
Believe me, there's
I
a lot of
know.
us know.
You could come look at
I think there
ours.
are three of us, I think there are three of us on
know what we're
board.
talking about.
Thank you very
We
much.
understand it.
I'm done now.
All right, thank you. Chris, comments?
Yeah, Madam President, just a couple of things. One is that, yes, our technical memo that we did previously did include alternative for removing the TP and the associated costs related to that. And just to be clear of what we had in that previous memo, we looked at the land use at that time and compared, and the hydraulic conditions at that time of the completion of the memo, and looked at current conditions with the obstruction in place, and then the removal and so on. And so what I would understand that Manager Bradley is asking for is to essentially do the analysis one more time, updating the hydrology for each one of those four scenarios to compare, you know, the existing condition with the, as of 2019 hydrology with the obstruction versus the 2019 hydrology with the obstruction removed, and 2019 hydrology
Yes.
with the other locations there.
Madam
Okay.
President, so since Mr. Morel mentioned just a moment ago about development, I'd like to know what the land use authority has planned for that particular acreage. I think that's important to know.
That's true.
If it may be in the report, I don't recall right now, Madam President.
That'll come at,
What's in that report, and I didn't review it before the meeting today, so, but that's something I'd like to know, what the zoning and land, their long-term plan for that particular local unit of government has for that property.
that's a good question, John, thank you. Everybody understand what that,
Yeah, I think that's fair to understand that.
okay. Yeah, I would like to know that too.
Madam Chair, is there a way that you can just, the report, instead of digging through things, can you electronically send it to me? The report that you're all, the long report that you're all discussing?
President Preiner, Manager Hockey, we can certainly provide the report that Houston completed for the issue. We'll get that out to everyone
Yeah, get
again.
back to us.
And then we will look for any revisions that Chris does and certainly have that as part of the packet for the hearing. And if you don't call for the hearing today, we'll look to modify the report and get that to you.
I just want to see the report so I can understand better what we're discussing today. Okay, thank you very much, Nick.
Madam President, I don't have any problem setting a hearing date.
No,
I think a hearing is the proper
right,
procedure in order to discuss these matters and to look
Right.
at them.
Is that a motion?
Yes, ma'am, I'll move that, whatever the hearing date you had in mind. I
For
don't recall it.
Wednesday, December 11th, 2019,
I move that Wednesday, December 11th, 2019,
at 7 PM at Shoreview City Council.
at Shoreview City Council, we have a repair hearing for Branch 1 of ACD 102232. Is that correct?
Need a second?
I'll second that,
December 11th.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion.
7 PM.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, let's get it started and get it completed,
done.
yeah. All right. Well, we have Kyle next on the
Yep.
water management plan.
President Priner, Board of Managers, as Kyle's getting ready here, we did receive numerous comments on our 60-day notice period for the watershed management plan. We are working diligently to try to adhere to a schedule and get this wrapped up in the beginning parts of the coming year. And I know Kyle's worked hard to get us here.
Needless to say, thank you,
Madam
Kyle.
President, members of the board, Nick, thank you. We have been working diligently on this. Kudos as well to staff at Houston Engineering for adhering to my extremely tight timelines and demands. Rachel and Charlie have been excellent over there, as they have been throughout the process. I will note, as we get into this a little bit, there are a couple of changes. I provided a new handout of the response to comments table, and there are a couple of notable changes in there I'll mention. Nothing crazy or too material, other than the very last page is a slate of revised goals. We'll run through that. But first, I'll just take a look at where we're at right now. Our comment period ran from August 7th to October 9th. That was a 60-day agency review comment period. We are here today on the 23rd. Hopefully, we can get to a point that the board will approve our slate of responses so that I can get those distributed today. State statutes require that there be at least 10 days between the release of comments and the required public hearing. Provided we approve the response to comments today, I will be asking the board to set a public hearing on our draft watershed management plan for November 4th. That is 12 days from today, which will require me to get the comments out this afternoon. And then ideally, after that point, we would be preparing to release a final draft plan to Bowser for 90-day review on December 11th. There's, say, minimal flexibility in there other than delaying the process, okay? So certainly want to make sure that everyone is good with the slate of responses today. Any adjustments that may be required, we can talk through those. I apologize in advance. It'll be a somewhat dry presentation if we do get through all of it, but bear with me on that. Quick summary, all 7 state review agencies responded to our request for comments. 4 of those agencies actually submitted comments. We had 47 other reviewers, cities, counties, SWCDs, et cetera. 11 other reviewers submitted comments. In total, we had 158 comments received. The 156 that were in your packet, there are 2 additional comments received by Bowser. I'll touch on those now. Those were received via phone call after the comment period ended, but they are good comments and ones that we can accommodate, and I believe both are resulting in plan changes. So on the handout I provided, which apparently doesn't have page numbers, the very last 11 by 17 page, there's a note of Bowser phone call, October 18th. There are 2 new comments there and responses. The first is related to our capital improvement plan table 4.3 in the plan. A previous comment is going to result in changes to that table where they want us to tie our capital projects to goals in the plan, and that's easy to do, so we will do that. Comment number 17 there from Bowser is they're asking for additional language related to notice requirements for water management districts, and we will add that to Chapter 5 where appropriate. So that, I wanted to just make sure you were aware of that change. And then, let's see where we at. There are a number of comments that resulted in a proposed change to the draft WMP 60, in fact, out of the 158 comments. Some of those are a little bit duplicative from some of our cities, but quite a number of changes are proposed. In addition, we had, I will say, a substantial number of comments from a variety of commenters, various cities, Washington Conservation District, Washington County, a couple others, that were specifically addressing the district's rules and rule administration, which our response in general to those comments is that this plan is not the vehicle for changing the district rules. That's a separate procedure, and we will be addressing their concerns at that time. So with that, I've got some highlights in here. It's a lot to get through. There's one area I want to touch on specifically, which is the last page, the 8.5 by 11 in that new packet I handed out, which relates to one of Bowser's comments and also to one of MPCA's. I would like to hear from the board, if you've reviewed this, if you have any concerns or changes you'd like to see made. Otherwise, it's a lot of slides to run through some of the bigger comments that may have policy implications. Like I say, we'll try and get through here as quick as we can. The first big one, though, is Bowser comment number 6, which, if I can get back to it now, it's on page 46 in your packet. Again, I don't have page numbers on the handout. This is one that we knew was probably likely to be coming, and it has to do with the measurable goals that Bowser requires to have in the plan. As you know, we had a lot of our goals were saying we will do things annually, et cetera. Bowser has some significant concerns about the language we've used for those measurable goals. They don't feel they're measurable enough to meet statute requirements. So what that has precipitated is a response to comments that refers to this last page that I handed out. And the Houston engineering staff and myself have gone through all of the measurable goals in the plan. And what we have here is an attempt to make them all what we feel is measurable enough to essentially make Bowser happy. So our official response is referring to this attachment A of the table. I'll put them on the screen, so hopefully they're a little easier to read. It's a lot to go through.
President Preiner,
Yeah.
excuse me, Kyle. Try and hold this together here a little bit. I just want to make sure everybody should now be looking at the 8.5 by 11, the last page of
Last
it.
page,
Right.
yeah.
So Kyle said there was a comment that's in the table. You can kind of dismiss with that, but it directed the district or asked, the comment to the district was to, hey, you really need to have measurable goals, right, Kyle?
Yeah.
And this is that resulting thing, table
Yeah.
of defining the goals.
And what I'd like to focus on is maybe, touching through or reading through some of these measurable goals. And if the board would let me know if you have any concerns about them. We're not trying to overstep or say that we can do things that we do not think are achievable. Many of these that we've adjusted, it's a wholesale delete and replace. I see Manager Bradley has a question.
If I go to your handout this morning,
Yes.
number 6 on Bowser, would it be accurate to say, instead of the district is revisiting, the district has revisited and has made changes?
Correct. Yeah, that would be a correct. At the time of printing, that was, we were
'Cause that-
proposing in the future.
As it is, it's confusing, because as I understand what you're trying to do is, this is in fact responsive to their concerns.
Correct, yes. Our intent was to try and get this done before it was released today. That was completed yesterday. So,
just
yes. Yep.
suggest you change that language to
Yep,
current
yep.
tense.
Madam President. Is that, just a comment before you begin, I'm glad to see that you're taking such an aggressive measure to bring up goals, and this is an issue that I've heard in the last month at 2 separate meetings I've been at, when I was attending a live meeting with managers, Bradley and Manager Hockey. Yes. The gentleman from Bowser made a point about talking about measurable results from their money programs that they were handing out. And when I was at the Legislative Commission on Water, which is called some subcommittee now, again, that was the same thing that was said there by the members of the legislature, was that from now on, it's been 15 years of handing out dollars under the sales tax money, Lessard Act or Clean Water Funds, and they want to see long-term provable results, not just a snapshot before and after. So I'm happy to see that we're moving in the direction that it seems to be the hot issue at the moment.
Okay.
All right, Madam President, thank you, Manager Waller, and like I say, we've taken an attempt here. You know, there's not a whole lot of guidance on creating the measurable goals. They just say they want them to be measurable. So,
Yes.
you know, I think at this point I'm fairly confident that we can get through Bowser's review with this. Our intent between the release of these comments and presumably December when we send the plan to Bowser for formal review, our board conservationist has agreed to work with me and the board ultimately to kind of make sure these are good to go before we make that final submittal, so we don't get hung up. Anyhow, so some of the measures again that are changing, some are not changing. We had some in there that we felt were adequate. Some big ones here. Big changes. PDS 3 is issue number. It's part of the public drainage system, communication and outreach. You know, we've asked Beth to give us some idea of things that we can do that we, you know, these are things that we do related to communication about public drainage systems and projects and repairs. So we have, you know, items in there that are now measurable. Send at least one to two project communications to affected landowners and stakeholders in addition to legal requirements. You know, that's something we typically always do. You know, press statements for each project, keeping the website updated quarterly for projects. The next one down, which are other drainage systems, non-public systems, just ensuring that 100% of all of those system concerns that are received by the district are addressed consistent with the district's natural channel maintenance policy. You know, some of them like that are a little more difficult to provide a measure to, so that's our attempt at that. F1, 2, and 3, these are in flooding. We have a measure in here to collaborate with partners to implement district prioritized flood risk reduction projects to accrue 200 acre-feet of new live flood storage during the 10-year life of the plan. So we're looking to add about 20 acre-feet a year of new flood storage to the district. The projects that we have proposed, the programs we have in place, we feel that's an adequate goal and something that can be achieved. If we're doing our job, we will achieve it, I guess. We'll, you know, say it like that. You know, updating the district's future conditions model at least once during the next cycle. And then completing an update annually to the district-wide model itself over the next 10 years. You know, these are things that we do on the regular. Is there any concerns with those goals or numbers?
Well, this whole thing to me, let me see if I can get this right. The legislature was giving out money with no goals. Now they decided they want goals, but they have no idea what goals. We're supposed to come up with them. It seems to me
correct.
like a joke, if you want to know the truth.
It's a new requirement for watershed plans, and I believe we're not the only ones struggling to address it. But it's something
Do
that,
they have any clue what any of these measurables mean?
No, I'm sure not. They don't even know what
I
a
mean,
watershed district is.
So we're doing a whole bunch of work, makeup work.
We're jumping through the hoops, is what
Yep,
we're doing.
is what we're doing is we're more government at work, wasting money and time.
So, Madam President, I don't disagree with you, Manager Ware. Okay, all right, I don't.
I'm glad you said
But I just want to share some communication that I understood from the Legislative Committee on Water, and why this is an issue. The sales tax amendment to the Constitution is for a 30-year time period. We have now reached half of that time period. So it seems to me that there's a number of members in the current legislature that are interested in preparing the basis to extend the sales tax in the 15 years from now. So in order to do that, they want to now start talking about measurable goals before it's too late, so that they can say 15 years from now, they can say, well, we have 15 years or 10 years of data here showing that the value of this money that was spent is worthwhile continuing this program and to extend it for some other time period in the future. That's what I understand the purpose is, or the push behind this. And it's true, they've been doing this 15 years without establishing any kind of standards or how this has gone on. And the legislators are telling the Bowser, and the Bowser's the one, the government agency here that is making the push about this now. So that's just some background, that's all I'm sharing. Not that I agree or disagree, I kind of
understand,
support
I
your
just-
point of view. But then on the other hand, I can understand their point of view too, as they want to know what works and what doesn't.
Well, they should have started that 15 years ago.
When they initiated it.
Well,
And now they're panicked because they're gonna come up, all of a sudden, 30 years are gonna be done, and they have done nothing except spend money with absolutely no.
Well,
And the other-
I think we all agree, that we gotta.
Anyway,
Kyle?
okay.
But our staff,
Hard for me to
our
stomach.
staff is working hard to begin
that-
to make a
Provide
change
them
here.
information.
And they're being
That's-
aggressive about it, and so I want to point
That's the
that
part
out.
that irritated me about
Yeah.
this, all, is that we've been doing our job, and then they come in and tell you,
Well,
you're not doing
Correct,
this.
they're changing the standard, they want a bit more reportable information as to what the value of the money spent. And so, ours is not the reason why, but to comply.
The only reason is that whenever the government lays a tax on anybody, you do not see it taken away. So
Never
they're
goes
going to
away.
continue no matter what. So measurable goals or not, it's going to continue. So plan on it for the next 100 years.
So we'll let Kyle get this in.
Sorry, Kyle. Sorry,
No,
Kyle.
that's okay. Like I said, I'm just trying.
It's not you.
That's okay. It's all good conversation. I'm just hoping to not put you to sleep throughout this
Can we
presentation.
move
So,
forward to
yes.
slide last?
All right. Hearing no direct concern with these, I will move forward. I have, I believe, 4 of these pages to get through. These are a series of water quality goals in the plan. One, we have a goal relating to reducing sediment loading from construction sites. This is one I drafted and proposed myself. We have the ability, and we're already tracking the number of active construction sites we have on the landscape in a year. We know how many violations we issue for sediment load, or for sediment violations, sediment release. I have a goal established to reduce the number of violations noted on sites to less than 1 per site per year. We're currently running about 1.6. So that's a little bit of a stretch goal. If we're, again, doing our job, inspecting sites, educating folks, I would hope that we could get there. Do you have an issue with that goal? I kind of made it up. I'm going to be honest.
Well, that's fine, if you think we can reach it.
And we
Also,
can
I will,
try to-
I try to reach it. I
We'll
think it's a good, it
Try to
would be a
reach it.
good, you'd see good outcomes in the resources
Yeah.
if that happened. I want to point out, if we don't make all of these goals, no one's getting in trouble, no one's going to jail,
They're not home.
right?
Manager Bradley and Manager Waller both have comments.
Madam President, Nick, you're probably the best person on this table to tell us whether or not we can make that goal.
Manager Bradley, I'd say that the board's approach to its regulations to be efficient and flexible, we've always been attentive to those violators, so I believe we can meet that goal. Yep.
Manager Waller, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just thought that it's okay.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying, it's, monitoring is what we're going to have to do, and, goal is, this is what that is, how to measure the monitoring.
Okay. A few other big ones here. Again, reducing the, implementing through our cost share programs, water quality BMPs, resulting in a total reduction of sediment loading to receiving waters of 100 tons over the 10-year lifespan of the plan. It's about 10 tons a year. We typically get that out of our stormwater management grants, urban stormwater grants. Not every year, but on average, I think we can do that. Again, looking to further development of our system-specific common carp management plans, growing on the work from the Lino Chain and Long Lake. We do have 3 systems, lake systems in the district identified as priorities for furthering that work, being Clear Mud and Howard, Peltier Centerville, and Silver Lake. Talking with Matt Koshin, those were the 3 areas where we have maybe the next most work to do there. Again, obviously with a goal to get their long-term density below that 100 kilograms per hectare, which you've heard from Matt is critical to carp not being an impact on water quality. The WQ4 there, we have really a new measure added, similar to the sediment reduction measure, but of reducing total phosphorus loading to receiving waters of 300 pounds over the 10-year lifespan of the plan. I think that is probably easily attainable with the work we have proposed. Probably attainable without the receipt of grant funds, with the work we have proposed without grant funds. So stretching beyond that, I think, will definitely require outside funding, so I don't want to lay us out to fail on that one. Additional goals here, again, doing at least one BMP annually that benefits groundwater-reliant natural resources, so ideally stormwater reuse, or other sorts of large-scale infiltration practices that benefit groundwater. The others are a little more mundane. Committing to, as part of our each annual budgeting cycle, reevaluating the district's capital projects for the upcoming 5-year period. I believe you guys already do that. We're just putting that on paper as something we can measure and say, yeah, we do that every year. Rule revisions at a minimum of every 5 years, and that is from other language in the plan. And then the last two here that were larger changes were specifically related to our communication and outreach program, and these I consulted with Beth Cranio directly on what is attainable for these efforts. So that's what we're proposing. I think Bowser should be happy with them at this point. Certainly I can say that all of the goals in the plan are measurable to some degree. With that, before I go into a whole slate of other things, and we're here for another hour, I would like to ask the board, if you've reviewed the draft comments that were provided, if you have any suggestions you'd like to make up front, and we can discuss those first. And if maybe there are some other lingering ones I want to touch on, just so you're aware, if we don't discuss them, I'll bring them up.
Bradley had a couple comments.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm passing out, and maybe Mr. Smith can give his copy to John.
Oh, yeah, I think I have that. Go ahead.
So, I did, of course, do what I do, which is I read them, and the first one I came to was Hugo number 17, and a comparable comment in Washington County. And Hugo number 17 specifically asked, see if we can find it.
It's on our camera here.
Oh, okay, thank
It's on
you.
the TV.
That was one I had on my list, so.
Okay.
So it said some clarity is needed here to explain how decisions are made to prioritize the needs of one location over another. We encourage the district to incorporate some form of geographic equity within the plan to ensure that all portions, et cetera. So I went and I read what we said. I have no problem with what we said in the plan. So I looked to see what could we do to further clarify how we act. And I thought about how, in my experience, when someone brings us a problem, what do we do? So I'm proposing we add, Rice Creek Watershed District is committed to treating its LGUs, county partners, and landowners equitably, addressing needs and concerns in a respectful and responsive manner. When a new concern and/or request for assistance is received, Rice Creek Watershed District will evaluate the issue considering the urgency of the problem, the nature of the district's responsibility, and the capacity of the district to respond, including available funding and staffing considerations. In all cases, the matter will be fairly considered and evaluated.
Seems
I hope
like
it-
a
I hope it's,
fine-
I hope it's more than just words, but it reflects at least my
I think that
view of
reflects
what we
what
do.
we do.
Yep, I do too. I think that would be a nice addition.
We've already got in our comments, our view about geographic specific locations, and I didn't propose any changes. The next one I had is Fridley number 2, which requested monitoring schedule for Lock Lake and comments by Washington County Board at its meeting with watersheds with regard to our facilities. Do we in fact evaluate our facilities on a timely basis? So I suggested an additional reply in 223, which addresses our ongoing evaluation of district facilities, which includes Lock Lake. Rice Creek Watershed District includes in its budget funds for the anticipated dredging of Lock Lake. So that's my suggested addition there. Friendly number 4, request language allowing transferring peak flows across watershed boundaries. And now I'm a little out of my league here, but I know we have Mr. Ricky Noonan here, John. Any action by Rice Creek Watershed District to change the flow of water from Rice Creek Watershed District to another watershed would require specific approval by the affected watershed and is therefore beyond the scope of this plan. Suggestion.
Yeah.
Fridley, number 5, requesting additional funding for cost-sharing programs.
I'm sorry,
Yep.
Madam President, and Manager Bradley, one thing to note is I'm not exactly clear from Fridley's comment whether when they're talking about watershed boundaries, they're talking about
Sub-watershed.
the sub-watersheds or the Rice Creek watershed versus another watershed district.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I can't tell either, and I was just using watershed as watershed, but.
Madam President, Manager Bradley, if I can, I had the same question in reviewing their comment. I was taking a look at the city of Fridley, and in our portion of the city, putting myself in their shoes, there are really maybe 3 or 4 major like what I would call a sub-watershed, catchment in Rice Creek, in Fridley, all of which have peak flow issues and flooding problems. And so I'm not sure how transferring flow from one to the other internally to our watershed would really do much good for anyone. Maybe on a micro scale, but not at a scale we have delineated. So my assumption was that they would be talking about us versus Coon Creek or us versus MWMO.
That's right. That's
In
right.
which case your comment would apply, but I don't know otherwise.
Well,
Well, do we need to put that in the comments, that if that applies to that, this is our comment back?
Maybe we should
Clarify
ask-
it?
We could
just
clarify
ask
that.
for
I could ask
clarification.
Yeah, ask
Jim
them for
as
sure
well,
that we're
but-
addressing the
But-
right issue.
But the issue that they're getting to is flooding.
Yeah.
Too much water in the sub-watersheds is what, I'm assuming, if that's what they're talking about, they're complaining about. That water is, there's not enough of creek to handle all the water that's coming off of those subs. Peak flow.
Would it-
doesn't-
But we should clarify that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
We
just,
wa- we wanna
we're
answer
talking
that.
about
I-
the smaller
yeah, so
sub-watershed,
You
not
need to have an understanding what the issue is.
not to deal with Coon Creek or the Waterman.
So you just.
Minneapolis,
you would add a
WMO or
qualifying
anything else.
clause if the concern is related to transferring water
Exactly.
between watersheds, then any, blah, blah, blah. You might
Then
close
that's the
language.
answer, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that, I think we can just add a clarification at this point,
Yeah.
because I don't have time to call Jim before the meeting's
No,
over,
and
so.
let's go with what we have, yeah.
Number 5, ask for additional funding for cost share programs. And my reply would be, the board was unable to increase funding in 2020 due to the significant budget increases resulting from existing capital projects, should be plural, but we'll consider this issue annually.
Right.
This is,
Just trying to be responsive to these guys, go ahead. Yeah.
Madam President, Manager Bradley, if I will, this was one that I had in my presentation for later. All fine and good. I will note, the watershed plan currently has an estimated 10-year budget of $3 million when we made a number of cuts earlier in the process to get the budget, if you will, down in the plan. We cut that program from $5 million to $3 million, which doesn't really allow us to go up to $500,000 a year in subsequent years without kind of reducing it in other years. So what I would recommend, if you want to maintain that flexibility, and this is entirely up to the board, we could modify the plan to change that project line item back to $5 million. It doesn't require you to have $500,000 a year in the like for 2020, you have $300,000, and that's an annual budgeting decision. It would allow you that flexibility. And I think there's been some voiced concern from a couple of our municipalities that, every dollar in there is what's going to be spent and how it's going to be spent, and some of our responses address that. That's not the case. It's a planning document, although it does need, you know, our budgets and efforts in the future need to, you know, in many ways adhere to this, you know, are guided by this document. So if you want to maintain that flexibility to keep that program or potentially increase funding to that program in the future, we would need to change that line item, in my opinion.
I just don't think we should be changing it.
No.
And the other thing I
Wasn't
gotta
my
say is
suggestion.
if everybody's coming in complaining that our taxes are going up,
Yeah.
we can't continue to fund at higher rates.
Right,
So-
exactly. You can't have it both
Yeah.
ways.
Madam President, my thought was, and maybe it's naive, is that as we go forward in the next 10 years, hopefully we're going to have fewer major ditch projects, and maybe we'll have some ability within our caps to fund additional programs. And that was the basis for thinking that maybe we'd be able to sometime in the future do more. And I was just, I'm not married to any of this language, mind you. And so that was my thought. And if you, otherwise, you could just say the board was unable to increase funding in 2020 due to the significant budget increases resulting from existing capital projects, and just not put,
Leave it at
but
that.
Yeah,
we'll
I
consider
agree with
this
that.
issue annually. But I think we will consider this issue annually.
Yes, we would, that's what we
Yeah.
thought we'd do.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought so
But
too.
we, you
So
know, we
this-
went and reduced that plan just so we could inform
Get the
with our project.
2020 budget done.
So,
All fair and good points. Otherwise, yeah, I would take that comment and would note too, the plan is it is a living document. If a
Yes.
future board or this board at a future date wishes to amend the plan or make modifications, there are procedures for doing so. So it doesn't, you know, you can, in many ways, you can do what you want, so.
yeah.
And then the final one was Washington County number 1, not experiencing additional burden for projects that they do not receive direct benefit from. My comment would see the reply to Hugo number 17 that I previously set forth. Those are my suggested additions to our responses.
Well, thank you for being such a good wordsmith and looking it all over. Great.
I read them, I just didn't come up with any brilliant ideas.
Well, it's just, you know, it was just, well, that's just me. So,
So good that he hasn't.
Okay, everybody
enjoys
agree
doing
with
that
Mike's,
kind of stuff.
to put Mike's comments into this so that
Yeah.
Kyle can just go ahead and do that.
However you
I,
have to do it.
Yep.
Madam President, I
Consensus.
don't disagree with putting his comments in there. However, I do believe that the comments coming from Hugo and Washington County and Lina Lakes, which is really the tremendous growth area that's going on here, are relevant as to the amount of money and equitableness that's there. I'll support putting his comments in. I don't necessarily agree, except with the very last sentence you said that you hope these aren't just words. Hope is
Well, I think this board
is
has
a-
already
is a-
shown
intend
that.
them
hope-
to be.
Yeah.
Hope,
I didn't, yeah.
hope is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't just trying to,
But,
yeah.
hope is a wonderful thing. You must be optimistic, but as a past president used to say, trust but verify.
To clarify, what I was trying to say was I wasn't just trying to exactly placate, I meant these words. I mean,
Yeah.
this reflects my policy, personal view of what we do.
And as I said, you know, I realize that, I understand that good intentions and well-meaning, oftentimes more safeguards are needed to provide the implementation of those good intentions and well-meaning.
Okay, Kyle.
All right. I'm going to attempt to run through the rest of these really quick then. There are a few that I would like to point out to the board. See if there's a few others on the front end here. Where are we at here? Okay, Hugo had a comment about referencing, really the bulk of the main part of this is referencing the development of regional stormwater management plans related to our future conditions model, and they want that added to our implementation table, discussing how the cities might be involved in that effort. The main part of our response is there are really two regional stormwater management plans that are identified in the plan. I believe it's up in the Columbus and Forest Lake area. And, you know, we're planning to add language to that section that they reference to clarify that, you know, we welcome those processes, that they need to be started and generated from the land use authority, which we are not, and that we would intend to support those efforts where it's appropriate. So just maybe add some clarity there that we're intending to act as a partner, not necessarily drive the bus throughout the district on land use planning there, so.
Madam President, so that's important that we're not taking over the authority of the land use. that
Correct.
All of the cities are, if the counties, well, I don't think we only have one township, maybe a little bit of May over there that the county would be involved in. But that's important, and I think it's also important to make it clear that regional stormwater plans such as being developed for Forest Lake or Columbus are not limited, that kind of concept can be used, and we hope to be using it, expanding it, because it'd be better for us to be able to manage the traffic of water. And that's what our big business is, making sure that water gets down to the Atlantic Ocean. We don't want the ocean to be deprived.
Okay.
All right.
And it goes to the golf.
All right, Hugo 12, this is another one I just want to bring up. Again, also relating to a section we have on impacts of land use changes. This was a big theme in several of Hugo's comments. They're suggesting that we delete our entire section of the plan. I think there's a miscommunication here and how it was, the language was interpreted. But they're concerned about the plan predetermining the denial of permits based on land use, and that drainage issues are one of a multitude of competing factors determining proper land uses for a parcel. They say the section appears pointless as drafted. Our response is that we really don't intend to delete this section of the plan. The plan itself, if you read it as we've written it, it does not identify land use as being the solution to the issue, nor does the plan include any language that predetermines the denial of permits. Rather, we're just trying to acknowledge that changing land use, as we've seen through our future conditions model, will continue to affect flood flows, volumes, and elevations.
Absolutely.
And planning is necessary, and I think that's why it's actually a very important piece of the plan, so that we can establish our ability to partner with the land use authorities. Again,
Absolutely.
we're not trying to usurp that power
No.
in any way, as Manager Waller mentioned, so.
Good.
Madam President, so
Yep.
some, maybe work on the communication, and because when it was read by others, they certainly didn't understand it the way you presented it just now. I'm not finding fault with either one, but that's what this process is about, and maybe there's a need for to go through there and provide some more clarity so that to it, so that the authorities understand the purpose of it, and that it works in conjunction with the land authority. Because this is a very growing area there. I'm sure similar complaints could be heard, in other high areas. As I just look at the comments, I notice they come from just above, most of them come from the cities that are above County Road J. There's only Fridley and Mounds View that commented below it, whereas you had the high-growth cities, Lionel Lakes and Hugo, making the majority of the comments. So you need to work there, some
But I mean,
communication.
The language, though, is clear,
Yeah, I think it is.
and maybe they just need to be,
Well, I think that's,
I disagree respectfully that it wasn't clear, because that's what they wrote down. They said they didn't like it. And if it's that clear that there's something we're not communicating clearly, then, because what Kyle is giving for an intent and what the city is saying, just, they don't go together. They don't understand it. Kyle sounds a little softer today than what the city interpreted it as.
if I may, Chris, do you think there may be an opportunity to take another look at that paragraph? Again, to me, it reads pretty clear, and
Me too.
I think to Houston it does as well, but I
think-
certainly can't propose language standing here
Let's let
today, but.
Louis, you had a
Madam
comment?
President, I just want to kind of affirm where Manager Waller is coming from. I think that
Gee, I better sit up for
The-
this one.
the heart of your work with this plan is really about integrating land use and water resources management. And that's clearly the commitment in the language that Kyle's referring to. But there are many watershed districts that express that commitment,
and then go on within their work, and the cities and land use authorities go on within their spheres. And the heart of this is the partnership and the connection and the communication. So it's really not about what the plan says, it's about the ongoing working relationship and the shared understanding of how land use impacts water resources and vice versa. So I think it's really about the ongoing working relationships you have, more than exactly what the plan says. And I think the plan is expressing this commitment and re-expressing that in person and in other ways, in other forums, I think gets to the heart of what Manager Waller's talking about perhaps.
I think it's clearly stated, and I think we are working with the cities. I mean, we've
So,
been having meetings with them, and so I don't know.
so, Madam President, I just, I don't disagree with you, Mr. Smith, but I think the key language that you used or articulated here about the partnerships, maybe it's something that's missing from this paragraph area here. You know, that's not just the intent, but how to implement it. You're talking about this is the need, that's what's stated on that they're objecting to. You're saying the implementation of the plan involves a partnership. I don't see language in there that's talking about that necessarily here. Maybe that's a way to smooth some of this out. And also, you know, we're working under a time factor here. This plan is a plan. That means it can be revised. It's not forever for 10 years. You know, we can begin revisions. As soon as we finish this, we can start to work on it again.
Chris, you have a comment?
Manager Priner, yeah, just to reiterate what Kyle's stating and address Manager Waller's comments there, and I would agree that I think at this point, it's going to be challenging to make any sort of wholesale change in this paragraph to add more clarity, especially given that we would need to have some dialogue with Hugo to have the understanding of what part of it or how they didn't understand, because again, their comment starts with, you know, deleting the entire section. And so I think that, you know, as Manager Waller noted, that, you know, if we need to add clarity, we can, there are opportunities again in the future to do that, you know, through other communications in addition to potentially a, you know, some sort of future plan update. And in the interim, we could take one more look at this section and see if there's some language that we could add, but it wouldn't be something that I would want to state in the comment response that we're going to directly make a revision.
Madam President, I think that these comments we've received back from the cities, particularly the two growing areas, are very, very good. And I don't remember the last plan necessarily having such finite comments as they are this time. And so that's a good sign. And since all this is a record of what the comments are, it's a record of what more problems we need to work on. And so that's what I'd like to see done.
Okay.
Continue the work.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, when a plan is finally accepted and distributed, is there a cover letter that could just say, this is a plan, it's a document, a living document, that we want partnerships or anything like that, that just a disclaimer or is a disclaimer?
I think everybody knows that.
Every city, county meeting, yeah.
But I meant that, you know, just something that addresses some of those things. It's a
All
living
right, so
document.
let's let Kyle
Yeah.
keep going here.
Yeah, if I may too, and I mean, on this particular issue, tell me if I'm wrong, we're going to have some time here. Could we add to our response that, you know, maybe we intend to sit down with Hugo and discuss this? I think there's like one sentence that is really bugging. If I'm reading through this, there's probably one sentence, and it talks about the district reserves the right to deny permit approval if adverse impacts can't be avoided or mitigated. I think that's probably the
Sure,
rub.
that's what they're concerned about.
But
it's
it'd be
true.
good. It'd be good to know that. It is true. It is a true statement. But if there's, I'm just saying, if there's to better understand what the position is, because I think that the comment to delete the entire section
Yeah.
is incredibly strong,
Yeah.
and not, I mean, they're asking for a mile, they're not gonna get a mile.
They're gonna get two.
But there's other, there's really
Other
good
ways.
content in this
Yeah.
section, very relevant to the work that we do in our partnerships with others, so.
So, Kyle, I'd also mentioned that over the time of attending Metro Mod meetings here and listening to other managers, there is an interest, I'll put it, voiced by some of the other managers to use the watershed plan as a way to become the local government unit for the control of land use.
That's not our,
It's never been us.
I understand, but you and I have heard this over the long term. And I think that's, when you point to that particular sentence, that's what we're getting at. Or fear is at least there and needs to be worked out. That's all.
Okay,
okay,
clarity?
I think so.
Okay.
All right. We already discussed Hugo 17 and Washington 1, so I'm going to skip those for now. Hugo 18, what is this one? This is Hugo asking the district to consider again, more or less funding its implementation of our rules. Hugo 23 also touches on this, that, the cost of our regulatory program is spread across the district. Hugo feels its residents don't get value from that levy because it implements our rules locally. The response we have drafted is that, city implementation of district rules is an elective process. And the board at this time is not elected to investigate the suggested approach of compensating cities who have taken over rule administration. The district has instead administered the regulatory program with an understanding that the program provides shared benefit across the district. This would technically apply to Circle Pines as well. And I believe they touched on that. So that's our response. I want to be clear. Staff's position is that, or our feeling is that is consistent with the board's position on the issue. Certainly, there's nothing in the plan that would suggest otherwise.
Madam President. So I agree with you, Kyle, that the staff's position is consistent with the board's current position. But listening to the language proposed just a few moments ago by Manager Bradley, I'm hoping that language will be implemented, and this is one of those areas where equitability can be looked at.
I'm not aware of this issue having come before me as a member of this board. So I'm talking.
I've brought this issue.
I know, but I don't think we've ever.
I brought it up here
No,
at board meetings and said that Hugo, as a citizen, I pay a double tax there.
Clearly you have, Joe, but I don't, this is the first time I'm aware of Hugo saying, we wish you would pay us X amount of money. And my response is, if Hugo thinks it should be paid X amount of money, it should come to us and make that request for X amount of money. And then we could look at it and make an informed decision as a policy matter whether or not to fund that.
And I don't disagree with your proposed process that you're talking about, and I believe this is the beginning and the first step. As you said, you don't remember Hugo formally asking you before, and they have now put this down as part of the record. So I think the process is working here towards, and, that's, seems to be.
Okay.
Okay. Centerville 5, the city generally has a lack of concern of a lack of connection between the plan and reasonable fiscal constraints. This goes to comments that were given to the board probably a month or so ago by Administrator Stats over there. They're basically asking that for the plan to include the overall proposed levy for the next 10 years is the gist of what they're asking for.
I don't see how that's possible.
No.
Yeah, and that's our response, is that the plan that really does not and cannot propose an overall levy for the next 10 years.
Changes anyway.
Yeah, I think we've been pretty
Yeah,
clear about
yeah.
that.
Okay.
Well, either.
Happy Halloween. You still with me?
Yes, I don't know if I can get off that screen.
Fridley 2, we touched on earlier, so I just want to make sure you're still awake, that's all. Fridley 2, we discussed this earlier, and I think the addition of Manager Bradley's comments will add to our short response as shown. Fridley 5, we touched on this one as well, asking for, again, they're asking for doubling of the budget. We already discussed this note, and I think we'll just leave it as is. Washington Conservation District, comment number 5, they're looking for a policy to be added that projects, BMPs that are built within the watershed have the, like, monitoring considerations, monitoring protocols being considered during the design phase so that BMPs can actually be monitored in the future. Comment we have drafted, we do that already. It just wasn't explicit in the plan. So I have proposed adding a new policy to the plan that states that we would consider project-specific monitoring protocols in the design process of all capital improvement projects constructed by the district. And I want to be clear, I'm pointing out specifically capital improvement projects. So these are large projects. If we cost share on a rain garden down the street, we're not putting in piezometers, we're not putting in monitoring wells in a, $3,000 or $4,000 rain garden. It's not worth the cost to do so. Larger projects, iron enhanced sand filters, you name them, all those larger things that we do, both flood control and water quality, we do that on a regular basis as we're designing those projects.
I do think you should make sure, though, that they're aware we have been doing that, not just that this kind of looks like we changed it because of this.
Yeah,
I would make sure that
that's a good point.
they understand we have been doing that and will continue to do it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yep.
So, Madam President, so two things I look at this. One, I'm glad to see this language come in here because this goes in consistency with what we're hearing from the legislature and the Bowser, okay? Two, although we have done monitoring in the past, I don't think it's been long-term. We don't have consistently for all these programs an extensive enough monitoring to tell you what this has done over 10 years, for example. Although we probably have a few places where we've monitored things for 10 years. So the development of monitoring programs to show the failure or success of the money implemented is, to me, a very important measure in order to determine the effectiveness and
Well, I think then that should go into the cost of the project. The monitoring goes along with the project, so then we should add that into the cost. of the
Right.
project.
That's what I was just
But I'm
getting.
saying, you
Yeah.
take a snapshot the year before and a snapshot the year after is not enough. You need to have a point where you're looking at it over a 5-year period. You say, look, or maybe a 10-year period. Because remember, that's what the legislature's saying, okay, you've had this money for 15 years, what did you do with it? How did it work? And since and now to develop those programs or standards in order
But
to
it
provide
should
this
be-
kind
it
of
should be-
information.
It should be the
And-
cost.
It should
and
be
I-
attached to the
I'm not-
project.
I'm not objecting to attaching it to the project. I think it's a good idea to build it in immediately, but I'm saying is that it needs to be a longer term that we're looking at, not just the year before and the year after, but an ongoing process, because that tells you how well you're doing over a 20 or 30-year period.
How expensive is the monitoring? What I'm getting at is, I mean, we're having issues with people thinking we're spending too much money, but we want to do all these wonderful things down there. How expensive is the monitoring to do?
Sure. Couple points I'll make, Madam President, Manager Waller, and Wagaman. So I'm going to get to Manager Waller's point first. We do, for every capital project we put together that I've ever worked on, I work with Matt to put together a project-specific monitoring plan. Usually, we start out for the first 5 years, and there's only one project I've worked on that we've gotten to that 5-year term, and we're extending and modifying things later, and that's Onika Ridge Golf Course. All the others are still within that first
You're
5-year
adding
window.
to
Yeah,
continue
yeah, and
monitoring.
we're choosing to continue. We've modified some of the protocols, but we have a good idea of how the project works now, so we can tweak that. So that is something that we do on our major projects. Regarding the cost, highly variable. And the state, through Clean Water Fund, grant-funded projects like these, you can't use grant funds to pay for the monitoring, so it just has to be part of our budget moving forward, part of Matt's monitoring budget. And, the biggest piece of it is usually staff time. You can build in, if there's infrastructure you need, like at Hanson Park, some of the vaults and infrastructure we have are so that we can monitor the iron enhanced sand filter, the outflows from that. So that added cost to construction, we were able to include that at that time, but those ongoing costs, staff time and, equipment are probably the big bulk of it. I mean, lab costs are what they are, but it's not, to add a project to do that, lab costs aren't a meaningful, part of the monitoring budget. A lot of it is staff time and
So-
equipment.
So, Madam President, so you mentioned Onika Ridge, and that's a popular one, and I heard it mentioned at the Legislative Commission on Water here the other day too. So, but the resource of concern is Bald Eagle Lake. And so do we have a monitoring program where drainage ditch number 1 crosses Highway 61 and between there and the lake to tell us what the total phosphorus count is going up and down? And therefore you could say, well, look, back up here, we did this program, or we did that program, and this is where the bottom of the funnel, it made a difference in that sub-watershed district?
We do take samples at Ramsey Washington 1 at Hugo Road, so between the railroad and Hugo Road.
Yeah, on an annual
Yeah,
basis?
on a bi-weekly basis, I think.
Now?
Yeah, have been that's a routine monitoring site for us. Matt's been doing that for a number of years. And, when you're as far up in the watershed as Onika is too, and you're looking down there, it's easier for us at the site to say, oh, well, we're removing X pounds of phosphorus out of the watershed. Down at JD1, that's a much longer-term trend analysis.
Correct.
Based on the suite of projects that have been installed in that sub-watershed. So to tie your results at Hugo Road specifically to Onika Ridge that part is challenging.
It should be, the one at Hugo Road should show that suite of projects has made some significant difference. Because it's not just Onika Ridge, it also happens to be that, the
ponds
catch
there.
basins that are on the east side of 61, just a few block or so away. So that's what I'm getting at. That's what they're, when these overseers are looking to see what we did, they're saying, okay, your resource of concern in your plan is Bald Eagle Lake. 1/3 of your phosphorus came out of this drainage system called Ramsey Washington 1 and that 15 square miles of upstream. And so you've spent X amount of dollars on these suite of projects upstream. What's the impact right here at the edge of the funnel?
Yep.
And that's what I'm getting at.
Yep, and that is a long-term trend analysis. Weather patterns from year to year can cause wide swings.
I
So
understand,
I'm
Kyle,
just
but that's what I'm saying, that's the kind of long-term monitoring data that you have to have to provide us the substance for sustaining the kind of money that they want you to put in
Yep, and
from sales tax money.
Yep, and I think the district has a fairly robust program in that realm, so. Okay, White Bear Lake, number 4, I wanted to mention this one. In the plan, we referenced the district facilities inventory. The Preby Lake outlet is not listed as a district facility in that report or in the plan. White Bear Lake is asking whether, if it is ultimately determined to be owned by Rice Creek, it should be included in the table. Our response is that at the time of plan writing, it is not. Should that change in the future, we can update it. I bring this up because while we've been working on the plan, the Preby Lake outlet, it has failed a number of times in the last couple of years. I have been actually actively working with White Bear Lake staff to look at that situation, research into the history of it. Real fun history if you ever want to read up on that thing. Not fun. But anyway, so, and I would say the ownership is potentially unclear, or who's responsible for it. You'll likely be seeing this at a future workshop. I'll be meeting with them again in the next probably couple weeks to get their official position on it. So, or what they would like to request of us. So, I bring that up for now, but as of now in the plan, it's not a facility. We did build it back in the 70s, but anyway.
Has anybody had ownership of it in between, or, I mean, is it just kind of?
Well, that's the thing. So we built it under petition, under basic water management petition. Since that time, the city of White Bear Lake has, I would say, voluntarily completed maintenance as needed on the structure. The structure is in complete and total need of replacement at this time. So it's going to come up. So,
And-
yeah.
we're gonna-
Now's not the time to talk about that,
Right.
but
Yeah,
But-
let's keep this going.
Yeah.
Madam President, it also have to, when we look at that, take a look at the impacts downstream into Halls Marsh in that area,
Mhm.
because it's more than just the outlet structure itself
yeah.
failing. It's part of the,
Yeah.
there's,
We'll-
the way the project was put in, it needs some tender loving care to look at it again.
We'll discuss it all at a later date.
Okay.
All right, Bowser number 9. They were looking for us to identify priorities for future CARP management plans that we would develop as discussed in the plan. So we have added that list that Matt provided me there, and that's being added to the plan. Bowser 12, this one I touched on earlier, but they're looking for our CIP projects to be linked to goals as opposed to, we have them linked to the issues in the plan. We're going to change that around. So just noting that. They have another comment here. There was a typo in the letter, but he's looking for total budgets by year and the estimated 10-year totals of each budget item. Again, we're revising the table, as I just mentioned, but we want to be clear here that we budget on an annual basis. The estimated budgets, you can kind of tease that out of there in the plan, but we're not going to predict future budgets at this time, or place limitations on the board or future boards. So it's not consistent with our annual budgeting strategy. We're just being clear about that. That's it. That's all I had. Everything else is pretty low-key, so.
Thank you, thank you. Do we need to make a motion to,
Yes, we do have a draft motion on page 32 of your packet. Obviously, we'd be looking to incorporate all of the suggestions made today. We have clear record on that, audio and video. But we have a draft motion there that we're looking to have you release the response to comments. It would be as amended here, and schedule a public hearing for November 4th during your regular meeting.
okay?
Madam President, I would move to authorize staff to initiate the 2020 Stormwater Management Grant Program, and, is that the right one?
No,
32.
page 32.
32, well, there you go, it looks good.
That'll be the next.
How about, I move to adopt the response to comments table dated October 17, 2019, as modified by the additional comments received by staff today in today's hearing, as official response to agency comments on the district's 60-day draft of the 2020 Watershed Management Plan, directing staff to distribute the response to comments to reviewers immediately and to hold a public hearing on the draft 2020 Watershed Management Plan during the board's regular meeting scheduled for Monday, November 4th, 2019.
I will note that the date of the table will be updated to October 23rd.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, thank you on that, Kyle. and
Thank
then-
you. Thank you for bearing with me on that.
No problem, I appreciate it.
Okay, next for your consideration is release of an RFP for the 2020 Stormwater Management Grant Program. Again, hopefully for the last time, I'll be mentioning this is a renamed Urban Stormwater Management Cost Share Program. Not too many changes from the 2019 program. Notably, though, we do have a proposed increase in the typical maximum grant award from $50,000 to $100,000 per project potentially. We're still offering $10,000 per irrigated acre to reuse irrigation proposals. In total, there's approximately $300,000 available in funding in the program for 2020. In addition to that, there are $20,790 left over from last year in Ramsey County's watershed-based funding pilot program fund. So we will again make that available to an applicant in Ramsey County, hopefully. Given the small amount of watershed-based funds available left over from last year, I have proposed to remove all of the references to accepting feasibility studies as a part of that program. It's very likely we'll have just one application that'll get those funds. It saves a lot of staff time and trouble I'm having with Bowser reporting on benefits gained from feasibility studies. So we are proposing to eliminate that. So that'll streamline the review of everything quite a bit. With that, again, the program guidelines, everything is in the packet. There aren't really too many other changes other than just, deleting references again to the feasibility studies and some minor changes that were suggested by the advisory committee at their October meeting. With that, I'd entertain any questions.
Need a motion? Any questions for Kyle? Page 49 at the bottom.
Madam President, since I started reading it once, I might as well
Oh,
finish this off. I move to authorize staff to initiate the 2020 Stormwater Management Grant Program and Bowser Watershed-based funding pilot program, and notify potential applicants of funding availability by publishing the attached request for proposals.
Second.
motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
Busy week.
Yeah. Okay, Steve, I think you're next.
Okay, Madam Chair, I move to approve the check register dated October 23rd, 2019, in the amount of $281,006.05, prepared by Redpath and Company.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, reports, staff reports. Anybody? Go ahead.
President Priner, Board of Managers, just a couple of updates. We had a gentleman, Mr. Caldwell, that came to your last meeting regarding Kasha 14 and his work, the Anoka County work on that road project and his road ditch, his concerns, et cetera. My understanding, the county has reached out to him, Joe McPherson. I spoke with him today, and he has reached out to Mr. Caldwell to listen to his concerns again and see what, if anything, he can do. Again, that is largely their obligation, not the district's. I did look into the project itself, and it has not changed from its application format, which was a change of 0.2 acres or 8,700 square feet of new impervious, so it did not trigger our stormwater regulation. It wasn't modified in any way. Beyond that, I'll note that I signed a small task order with Houston Engineering in regards to our public drainage system and the culverts that the district had actually placed in the system as the, I'll call it the maintenance route. We want to be clear about where those are, whose responsibility they are, et cetera. So kind of defining our maintenance corridor, repeatable action, and so we don't have any confusion should a landowner come in with a permit application or a concern about a culvert. And then just lastly, I did post internally to Rice Creek staff, the permit coordinator, wetland specialist position. We look at that closing today, and we'll see what candidates, if any, come forward and proceed via the district's policy on that. I have nothing else.
Anything else? Any other questions? Go to the calendar, I guess. Take a look that we do have different dates in November. Friday, November 1st at 1 for the workshop, November 4th at 9 a.m. for the regular board meeting. Also, I don't know if we need to post it, but the board workshop in December, we usually start it an hour early because we like to have a staff get-together.
I will miss that November 4th.
November 4th, you're gone, okay?
Yes, and we were talking about having that, what was it we were talking about having on November 4th?
You mean the hearing, though,
We
is
will-
not the 4th?
That's December.
You mean his hearing?
Yeah, wasn't there something? Maybe I'm
it's just the last,
Maybe we thought about it and moved.
Oh, okay.
Whatever, it doesn't matter.
Maybe you think of the December 11th, 7 PM
I
meeting.
think you're right.
because that
Yeah.
changed to a night.
Yeah, that was an
Yeah.
evening.
Okay, anything else?
I'd just like to make I don't believe we've at a public meeting announced the fact that we have this new administrator on board. In other words, welcome, Nick. You are our new administrator. You knew that, or I guess it's been about 10 days or so that we've had Nick Tomczyk as our new administrator, and welcome aboard, and
Any
we're
complaints, just
welcome to
call
it there.
Nick.
Yeah, any complaints, address them to Nick.
Thank you, Manager Hockey and the rest of the board for your support. I do note that Beth from our office did do a press release or a
Yes.
MailChimp kind of thing to get the word out. So look forward to working with your partners and moving the district's intent through its water management plan forward. Thank you.
Best 10 days we've ever had.
We're glad you accept the position, and we're looking forward to working with you, so that'll be very good.
Okay, the last thing, of course, is the manager update. Manager Waller.
Yes, Madam President, if you don't mind, I'd like to use the podium.
In the meantime, I don't have a report until he gets up there.
Okay, Manager Bradley?
No,
Manager Wagland? And I don't have anything either, so it's John's show today.
Are you speaking as a board manager, or are you speaking as an independent
Yes,
citizen?
Yes, I'm speaking of all those things, yes. Madam President, I discussed earlier in the board meeting, attendance at the Legislative Water Commission, and we talked about what had happened at Washington County. But the other day, I received notice that there's about ditch number 5, some concerns about this. Apparently, the Department of Natural Resources is in negotiation, at least they've notified the Washington County Board that they're in negotiation to buy 340-some acres in southeast Forest Lake in the area that's in ditch number 5. And so I have here, see, how do I work this, Teresa? I brought a map today so that people could have a little orientation.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Doug here?
You have a better memory than most of us.
Yeah. All right. So anyways, as you remember from our packet a few weeks ago, this was basically ditch number 2 is this red line, and this is ditch number 5 here. And a little back history on this, of course, ditch number 2 was constructed in 1909, 10, 11. And at this time, it was a branch of ditch number 2. And then when it was constructed as a branch, I believe it took a right turn here and went up into this area. And this is where that property is going to be purchased. And what it will be is, we have currently right now some property that,
Here we go.
okay, thank you,
Now
Teresa.
we can see it.
So anyways, yeah, so, and our problem is how we work through the Department of Natural Resources property that's right in this area and here, okay? And that's been our problem. We had photographs of what that tile situation looked like, and it was deplorable. But the department owns a WMA right in this area, and they own one that's up here in that where we, former ditch number 6 that we used to have. And now they're talking about having a piece of property that would connect the 2 WMAs together. So I'm asking the board that we allow the administrator to contact the administrator in Forest Lake. And maybe this is an opportunity here for working with the city of Forest Lake, because they are the local land authority there. And they have authority to, and we've done this in the past when it was with the city of Columbus, for example, and the WMA that was the whole WMA at the time. Maybe we could negotiate some kind of resolution to, I'm going to call it a right-of-way for our main trunk to be exempt from the significant fish and wildlife habitat. And in case you don't know what that means, that's what a WMA is. A wildlife management area, when it has that designation, becomes a significant fish and wildlife habitat. And once the words significant fish and wildlife habitat are used, as you can see, Mr. Kolb recognizes those words, as we all do, it becomes pardon me?
I said, then you're cooked.
Yeah, well, yeah, you betcha. That's a problem. So here's an opportunity, just as we negotiated, working with the city of Columbus, to do something here. And the reason this changed was in 1920, when they made the branch of JD2 into an official tile line, they actually made a left turn where the blue line goes, you see? And they changed the actual structure of the ditch from when it used to go to the right up there. And so as I was notified yesterday by County Commissioner Muron, he said, well, the language describes that there's an old ditch up there. Don't worry about it, move on, nothing to see here. So I'm saying this is an opportunity, and I'd like to have Mr. Tomzak have authority from the board to talk to Kolb about this and to talk to our staff, Tom Schmidt, and to talk to the administration and council in Forest Lake. Maybe we could preserve that, right, and save ourselves in this negotiation here. The city has some leverage because this is tax property, and they're the ones that lose it. And the county would be supportive of this, I'm certain. But the county really doesn't have the lever in this issue. The city does. So that's what I wanted to present.
Mr. Kolb, any immediate thoughts? It doesn't have to be, or in general, or is this something we should, if you think it's a good pursuit, I think the board would agree we should look at it.
Madam President, members of the board, DNR acquisitions of this type typically need to go through a review and either a consent or an approval process, depending on what the nature of the purchase is. Oftentimes, those are opportunities for local concerns to be addressed. The exact nature of how we would address a concern with regard to the alignment of a public drainage system is a little bit different, but it certainly could be incorporated into those discussions. So I don't think it hurts anything to initiate those discussions with local government, address their concerns, and then to investigate how we would go about incorporating, maybe as a condition to the acquisition, some recognition or exclusion of certain restrictions that might apply to the drainage system and to future maintenance of the drainage system because of the designation of the WMA and some of the additional scrutiny that goes along with that. So it's an opportunity. We should certainly, if the board so chooses, we could certainly pursue that.
Consensus of the board to move forward and take a good look at this?
Can't hurt.
Yeah.
Sure.
Anybody? Joe? All right,
Yes,
thank you, John,
thank
for
you.
bringing that forward.
Yes, I think it's an opportunity. We've used this in the past. It's not too often we have it, so we should see if we can protect the stormwater plan for the city of Forest Lake.
That would sure help in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, you got that right.
Okay, anything else? If not, I'll need a motion.
I'll make a motion, adjourn.
Second?
Motion made and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.